me, since this is a techie conference, let me focus on something that's a little bit more like the history of technology. This is a museum website called Inventing Europe. Well, they've got a current exhibit called Europe Interrupted, so let's take a look at it. About post-war technology and social uses of post-war technology. Sort of had this really interesting subway train map. So I guess let's take a look at one of the things in the middle on cars. The car radio is mood regulated. They have something that's nice public exhibit here. Then they have a couple of sidebars. Oh, let's take a look at the radio one. And so there's a light box effect. Sort of nice stuff. So at one level, you could say that digital humanities is sort of a cool display. You can have thoughtful online exhibits of a bunch of things. And you can tell here this is not actually code that would run anywhere. But, okay, very bad job. The basis underneath that exhibit, however, is really what I want to talk about for a few minutes. The base package for this is something called Omica, which is an open source software package you can install on a server. It's downloadable, it's fully mature and stable, and then from it, anybody from a museum curatorial staff to you and me could install exhibits and items into a database and then create an online exhibit. Like WordPress, there are a whole bunch of plugins. You can modify the look of it, fairly fluid, and so forth. So who sorts of creates this sort of stuff? It's useful, but turns out this is a project of the Center for History and New Media from George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. And because it's nonprofit, it has, where is it? There we go, there's the laser pointer. It has a donate button, come on. Laser, oh well. It has a donate button in the top, and they do some other things as well. Like Zotero, which happens to be, if any of you have used Firefox, okay, when you did use Firefox before it would shut down your system after 2 minutes, you could install this as a plugin, as an add-on. It would allow you to go anywhere on the web if you were a student and didn't want to pay for RefWorks or ProSite, be able to build a bibliographic database and then output it in whatever citation style that you wanted to, as well as a bunch of other items. And very shortly, it will be standalone and be able to be added into other things like Chrome and IE. Now, what the heck is an academic center for history and new media building these projects? Well, at one level, historians are not stupid. People who do language are not stupid. They see the technology around them, and they try to use it. If you're talking 20 years ago, you might be talking about Richard Hamilton, a Greek professor at Bryn Mawr College who was one of the co-founders of the Bryn Mawr Classical Review, one of the early online journals. At that point, it was originally email. Now it's online, web-based. Or it might be once you realize that you can publish stuff online without peer review, you start to rethink the whole notion of what's the appropriate refereeing process for quality, for scholarship. When you have the archive server for mathematics and physical sciences and physics, what's the difference between a preprint and a postprint after publication and peer review? Do you really need peer review? What's the most important thing that matters in terms of quality? By the way, that is not an image from the movie 1984. It's Dan Cohen, who's the head of the Center for History and New Media. And this is an article in the New York Times talking about precisely what does it mean for peer review when you have new technologies. It turns out that a lot of academic presses are now collapsing. We've had a number of presses that have been shut down or put on hiatus. Rice University was shut down a number of years ago, then came back as a digital only and is being shut down again. Okay? So in that type of era, humanities scholars need to think for their own careers about what are the different alternatives, and this is one example of it. So at another level, digital humanities is a basis using technology for thinking what does it mean to have intellectual discourse and exploration. But it goes beyond that. The fact that you can use technology means that you can have different ways of exploring humanities. Come in, you're in the right place. So, for example, there's the Text Encoding Initiative, which is basically a way of formatting. It's an XML format. Okay, so that humanities scholars can take material in different languages, put it into a standard format, and then do analysis on it. Okay. If this looks like the rerunning of mathematical linguistics, I don't know, maybe they'll reinvent the wheel, they'll probably do some interesting things. I'm trying to explain to people why tag clouds are not really good mechanical, quantitative ways of looking at text, but that's a different story. Or inside the National Endowment for the Humanities, there is an Office of Digital Humanities. This is their website, okay, from last night. And look, there, oh, come on, I want that, there we go. They even understand about social media. Twitter feeds. Okay, maybe that's not so cool. They should have had about 6 months before that. And they have grants for startups, if that sounds familiar, so people understand the necessity to do experimental projects. And the next one is just in a couple days in Washington, D.C. Any of you happen to be planning to go to Washington, D.C. in a couple days? I didn't think so. It's okay, you can still follow it. So if you want to see what's going on with digital humanities and project directors for startups, okay, go here. Larger point, though, is that digital humanities is now developing a community infrastructure for larger projects, whether you're talking about the federal government's Office of Digital Humanities or larger intellectual projects like the Text and Coding Initiative. Let me give you an example of such a project. This was released in early August, anthologize.org. It is a plugin for WordPress. Okay? How many of you have ever wanted to take a blog and turn it into a book? Either a PDF, ebook, something like that sounds pretty good? You could do this. By the way, it's in alpha, okay? It was released 0.3 alpha, August 3rd. But it still actually works. This is in the middle of my dashboard. It appears as this. You click it, you create a project. This is my project because I wanted my students to get a sense of how I think about the history of education. On the left-hand side is a list of posts. On the right-hand side are the posts that I have pulled into the particular project. If you're interested in the technology, basically what they did in the standard post table in WordPress, they built a couple new post types, and then from that post type they can draw it in and send it to a middle layer of XML, and then from an XML they can turn it into output, EPUB, PDF, a couple other things, and there can be plugins to create new sorts of outputs. If you're curious about the technology. You may sort of wonder, okay, can I follow this as it's developed? Yes, that looked like a standard ticketing technology for code. They use Git for versioning before they do it, so you can take a look at it. So at another level, it's a mature open source development process, not everywhere. Not everywhere. Thus, a lot of the startup projects that are going to be talked about in the Office of Digital Humanities project managers meeting or whatever they have next week, you know, like everything else, a bunch of it's going to fail. It's experimental. Some of it's going to succeed. However, I forgot to tell you one other thing about Anthologize. That 0.3 alpha was constructed in about 10 days. I didn't mean, by the way, that it was constructed in terms of coding. It was conceived and constructed in 10 days. This was a project funded as one of the workshops of the Office of Digital Humanities. They brought in about 25 people, 20 to 25 people, to the Center for History and New Media, some of whom were coders, some of whom were just scholars, and they said, let's brainstorm and create, okay, what was the pre-release, alpha release version. So they spent most of the day talking about workflow and teaching those people who had never done coding how to fit into their workflow. Then they brainstormed on Monday evening. Tuesday morning, they narrowed the list of projects down to 5 and then to 1. And then the next 3.5 days and nights and overnight and spending in the bar, they did coding. And then about a week after that, after the coders had gone home and connected up, they released it to the world as 0.3 alpha. Oh, you may want to know what type of coders they brought with them. Anybody ever hear of BuddyPress as a plugin? The main developer, BuddyPress, was one of the coders. Okay, he happens to work in at the City University of New York.
Doesn't he do a lot more Or he did a lot of stuff with multi-user early on.
He does a lot of stuff, right? He's a digital humanist. That's how he identifies himself professionally. Okay? This world has a lot of really smart people. Much smarter than I am in terms of that sort of stuff. Oh, yeah, the 3 teams that they had working for those 5 days. Coding, as you might expect, user experience, and outreach. They devoted a third of the people who came there to outreach. By the way, they didn't always have the coders in the coding group. Some of the coders were in the outreach group. Why? Well, part of it was this workshop environment where they teach people how to build stuff. And part of it also was they wanted to mix people deliberately and have enough of that mix. So, you know, this is like familiar. You have a developers group in Google Groups, and they follow a users group in Google Groups. That sounds pretty standard. Swag. That swag was up on the website by the end of the week. That's Cafe Press, if you don't recognize this type of stuff. So some of the activities they did was user support in terms of documentation of the Google group. They had blogging and Twittering, so all of us who were not in 1 week, one tool, were following it, and they kept the project secret. They said, we're going to release it on August 3rd, but you don't get to know anything about it other than, and they were blogging about the process and learning workflow and stuff like that. And then on August 3rd, they did a video cast. Ustream, I think, was the basis for it, and released the website. Oh yeah, and they also did media kits. They did it successfully enough so that the day of the release, oh yeah, why did they do this? Okay? The basic standard for the Center for History and New Media is that if people aren't using the tool, it's not good enough. So they put an enormous amount of outreach efforts into Zotero along with the coding. And then when they built Anthologize, they did the same thing. Because the whole point of trying to get people to use it, you have to build it by word of mouth. So the day of the release, there was a blog entry on what the main newspaper of record for higher education in the U.S., the Chronicle of Higher Education, talking about how Digital Humanities built a tool, Anthologize, to be able to turn a blog into a book. They did it in a week. And it also appeared in The Atlantic on the blog entries, this entry written by Alexis Madrigal. So it got a certain amount of press. Oh yeah! The person who's standing in the front of the room is not one of the people who developed this. I'm a user. And they just turned me into a way to evangelize this tool. All right. So why am I standing here in front of you with a shirt about that camp, talking about digital humanities and the fact that there are coders and scholars working together? Part of it is this guy in the back of the room who said, hey, why don't you come to bar camp? Part of it is that the inspiration for bar camp, for that camp, is bar camp. That camp is an unconference put on by the Center for History and New Media. It's put it on for 3 years in a row. It's now regionalized. The first one in the Southeast is going to be at Emory University in early March. There will probably be another one in the spring in Tallahassee around FSU. Okay? Same basic gist in terms of unconference, no schedule, no hierarchies. I'm a full professor. I was sitting and learning from coders and staff and graduate students when I went to that camp last year. Same with 1 week, one tool in terms of coders and scholars learning from each other in terms of how to develop a tool. This is the t-shirt I got. Looks sort of close to the t-shirt that you got yesterday. All right, same idea. Or, if you want to learn a little bit about how academics try to use the same type of development system and thinking about outreach that many of you do professionally or beyond your day job, if you want to see what digital humanities do, you can follow this. I'm going to be putting this PowerPoint, okay, it's a, what is the
Keynote.
Keynote, right. I still haven't gotten that word in my head. It'll be somewhere within a day and it'll be connected from bar camp. And in part, it is a thank you from the humanities community back to you. And at some level, if you want to ask what the Foo Digital Humanities, at least today, it's paying it forward. Thank you.